So today we are going to be going through the leopard-like beast, and we're going to look a little bit more in depth about what caused the deadly wound and also what is healing it and what are the signs. And also we're going to go through some current events of what's going on in the U.S. We do have people that follow our studies that do not live in America. So they like to understand what's going here because they may not get the news as we get it, or, we know firsthand what's going on. So we'll just go over that on how the country is changing at a rapid pace and how that is standing up to what prophecy has predicted. So we're here to discuss the leopard-like beast of Revelation 13. Now, this beast is very important to understand correctly because it represents the time that we are living in. As you know, this chart tells the world's history in prophetic symbols. And on this chart are featured the beasts in Daniel 7, Revelation 13, and Revelation 17. The first four beasts right here, lion, bear, leopard, and this beast is actually one beast in two stages. That's Rome. Okay, that's found in Daniel 7. Then the leopard-like beast that we're going to be focusing on is found in Revelation 13, along with the two-horned beast. That's also found in Revelation 13. And then this last beast is found in Revelation 17. So if we look at an overview, when we're looking at the beasts, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 beasts, right? And then there's actually 7 universal kingdoms, and we're going to go quickly through that, okay? From creation to the millennium. So if you notice this timeline, it starts from creation, because we must recognize that there was a world, a civilization before the flood, the antediluvian world. This world is kingdom number 1. So next we have the lion, which represents Babylon and actually correlates with the golden head on that great image found in Daniel 2. The lion actually occupies a longer period of time than the head of gold. Okay, if you read the Bible and it starts talking about Nimrod, he was several generations after the flood. And then it talks about Babel and Shinar, all those things, all those civilizations were rising up slowly. So the lion is kingdom number 2, universal kingdom number 2. Next we have the bear, which is Medo-Persia, who is number 3. And if you look at the unnatural features on each beast, that numbers these kingdoms. So the antediluvian world is kingdom number 1. The lion has 2 wings. That numbers it as number 2. The bear, Medo-Persia, has 3 ribs. And remember, the bear is said to rise and devour much flesh. That was the bloody way that the Medo-Persia came in and went out. And then next we have the 4-headed leopard, which represents Grecia. And the 4 wings number it as number 4. Now, the reason it has 4 heads is because, that kingdom was split up between the 4 generals. And now we see a change in the appearance of the beasts, because we're not going to see them numbered in the same way that these first 3 beasts are, because there's a dividing line. If you look closely, it says 31 AD, that's the crucifixion. That is the close of the typical system, and then the opening of the anti-typical system. So everything that we have before that point has capability of being a type. And that's why in Revelation 17, we see that Babylon is a type. We also talked about briefly before the study started that Assyria is actually a type as well, antitypical Assyria. We will get into that study a little bit later. We may touch on it a little bit now. Now, the next beast, which is the fifth universal kingdom, but it's actually the fourth beast because the antediluvian world is not represented by a beast. But this beast right here is a dreadful, nondescript beast that wars against the saints of God, or wears out the saints of God, right, in Daniel. And this beast goes through a change at some point, and 3 horns are plucked up, and then the horn head, it comes in, and it's a mouth speaking great things. And both beasts are basically wearing out the saints, and this represents Rome in both stages. Pagan Rome persecuted the Church of God, the early Christian church, for several centuries, and then it kind of like changed and adopted Christianity, and then it ill-treated the pagans. And so that's why this beast is so nondescript, because Rome kind of switched what it wanted to be. It didn't know if it wanted to be pagan, it didn't know if it wanted to be Christian, and it just morphed and changed. So now we see the leopard-like beast, which we are focusing on for this study. Okay, we could see that his pathway kind of intersects and overlaps the papal beast right here, the hornhead nondescript beast. And that's because this leopard-like beast reigns contemporaneously with the hornhead beast. That means it's rising. All the components that were to make up this leopard-like beast are rising. Because when we get to the leopard-like beast, it details the Protestant Reformation. If you notice, the parts of this beast, it has the body of a leopard, the feet of a bear, the mouth of a lion. It has 7 heads and 10 horns. So the 10 horns are back, but note that it doesn't have a horn head, right? The horns and the heads are separated, and with one of the heads having that deadly wound. That, of course, is the Catholic Church. Now, this is where at Venice, they view this beast as the big, bad, evil Catholic Church, the papacy. Okay, because as the Great Controversy was revised, it started being just labeled as the papacy. But if you look at the 1884 version of the Great Controversy, Ellen White calls this beast earthly governments as well. She calls it the papacy, and she calls it those earthly governments that are especially trampling on the law of God. And it's also in the index in the 1884 version that this beast is a descendant of the previous beast and represents the world, the earth at a certain point in time. Now, we know we have not passed from the leopard-like beast to this beast right here in Revelation 17, which is the Scarlet-Colored beast. We haven't passed through it because if we read carefully, there's some things that have not been fulfilled in Revelation 13, where the leopard-like beast is found. So a couple of things to note: that the 2-horned beast will appear directly after the leopard-like beast in Revelation 13. Let's look at it.
And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, and his seat, and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world wondered after the beast, and they worshipped the dragon which gave power unto the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spake as a dragon, And he exerciseth all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed.
Now, something needs to be said about these scriptures, because we need to look at which beast is being worshipped. Which beast is the two-horned beast saying we need to worship this beast? Some people skip over to the scarlet-colored beast and they say, this is the beast that they're talking about. This is Babylon, and the two-horned beast is going to give this scarlet-colored beast, all its power. Okay, they skip right into this phase right here. But if you read the scripture very, very closely, these verses right here are all about the leopard-like beast. Okay, this leopard-like beast is a beast that comes after Rome, but it extends all the way down to our present time. If we are looking at the beasts that represent Rome, and we can see that Rome is on the rise in the time of Christ, pagan Rome falls in 476 AD. Ecclesiastical Rome rises to its height in 538 AD. That's when Rome reached a papal supremacy. You see that the three horns are removed, that we said one horn head comes up, showing civil and religious powers have combined. 7 is the number of the remaining horns, which show that the papacy had complete rule over the world. So what happens when ecclesiastical Rome falls? Inspiration shows that in Revelation 13, he goes into captivity. That is, he loses his power in 1798 AD, and that is the termination of the 42-month time period. And now the composite leopard-like beast is rising. So how do we know this? Well, all we have to do is look at the description: feet of a bear, mouth of a lion, body of a leopard, to tell it descended from the previous beast. We know that the Adventist Church calls this beast the papacy, and because the Adventist Church looks at it as just the papacy, it is looking for the reassertion of Roman papal dominance over the world. Okay, perhaps as a civil power, but it will not happen as they imagine it to, because that is not the complete interpretation of the beast. So here's an infographic that I made that can kind of help you to understand. And if we start picking this beast apart, we can look at and see that the papacy is only the wounded head. The fact that it has 7 heads indicates that this represents all of the Christian denominations. 7 is the number of completeness, and they're all under the title blasphemy. And if the heads are religious and the horns civil, then they are separated. And that's exactly what has taken place in the world today. The religious bodies no longer have civil power. It's the horns which rule, and they are free from the despotic church state controlling power of the Dark Ages. So if we look at this beast in its entirety, it's actually the present world. Rome is a part of it, the wounded head only, and this wound heals in stages. I'm going to read a short excerpt from 2SR 98 page 98, paragraph 1.
As it has been accepted that the exile of the Pope in 1798 was a signal that the infliction had been accomplished, so then as he has gained back his temporal power, it further proves that the deadly wound is healed. These facts cannot be denied, for it is admitted that the incident of 1798 is true, therefore the one in 1929 cannot be refuted. That being so, this is the time to which the prophetic symbol speaks, his deadly wound was healed. His deadly wound was healed, John says, and all the world wondered after the beast. Note that the world wondered after the beast and not after the head. Therefore, it cannot mean that the world would necessarily have to enroll in the membership of the system represented by the head. The significance is that all the world has partaken of the spirit of the beast, worldliness. The world in general has never been otherwise. It could not be said that all the world wondered after the beast if the people whom God has entrusted with the gospel are free from the spirit of the beast. but it must be that they have betrayed their trust and partaken of its spirit. Where is the distinction between the church and the world?
So the first infliction of the wound basically happened with Martin Luther. Now, the Adventist Church teaches that it was the Pope being taken captive by Berthier, the French general. But that captivity of the Pope could not have occurred without first the Protestant Reformation weakening the power of the papacy. So actually, it was the truth being preached from the Word of God and prompted one of the greatest movements in the world, the Protestant Reformation, that inflicted the blow. And the result of that, for a further infliction, was the Pope being taken captive. Okay. And then the next infliction is the loss of civil power entirely by the papacy. The papacy loses their civil power. So this is important to note, because when you look at how the wound begins to heal, you need to understand that as long as the Protestant Reformation is active, that deadly wound is still going to be there, okay? So when we dealt with 1844 and the Protestant churches went through a revival, they're hearing for the first time about the second coming of Jesus, preached by William Miller. And William Miller opens up the book of Daniel, right? That book was closed until a certain time. It says until the time of the end. But William Miller begins to open up, and he realizes that the things in the book of Daniel are starting to come together. God is giving him light. And he realized that the time is expiring in 1844. He had all the prophetic symbols right, but he misinterprets to mean the second coming of Christ. And so basically, when the churches, everyone that had joined that movement, if they rejected the Sabbath and the sanctuary truth that was revealed through the early Adventists, then we saw a huge spiritual declension. Okay. But then we have another church that comes on the scene, and that's when God takes all these doctrines and puts them all in one vessel, and that's the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And God forms a body that is his church in the Christian dispensation, and takes the Protestants out of captivity, right? And now he's formed his church, anti-typical Judah. And the wound, Hadam says, is still opened because the Adventists come on the scene. That's the only reason why it didn't close at that time. So the only thing that's going to cause the wound to heal is if Adventists stop protesting as a body. And we know that we studied recently in our past studies that what happened in 1888, which was the rejection of the message. It was the third angel's message. Okay, and Ellen White said it was basically like the loud cry. And if the church had accepted that message that God gave through Jones and Wagner in 1888, then the work been wrapped up, the kingdom would have been established, and Jesus would have came. But the church rejects the message in 1888, and then what happens is Brother Hadam comes up and he receives the message that was originally rejected in 1888. He's given the loud cry message. And Ellen White prophesies that the Lord would raise up a Joshua. She talks about how this rejection at 1888 is going to cause the church to go into 40 years of wandering, wilderness wandering. And then after that period, God will raise up a Joshua to lead us into the kingdom. And so that's exactly what Brother Hadam did. She also prophesied about Malachi 4:5 being fulfilled, and that God would raise up an Elijah. So she prophesies twice about a Joshua to lead us into the kingdom, and an Elijah who will be sent to us before the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Brother Haddon fulfills both these things because he tells us about the message of the judgment of the living. That's what prepares us for the great and dreadful day of the Lord. That great and dreadful day of the Lord is the kingdom being established. It's dreadful for one people, for the nations that are at enmity against God. And it's great for the people of God who are finally freed from their captivity from the world and brought into the kingdom. In the kingdom, Judah, anti-typical Judah, which is the church, finally shakes off her yoke. And the Bible says it is the Assyrian yoke. Okay? Because if we look at the time period that we're in, we are not in the Scarlet-Colored beast right now. The Scarlet-Colored beast in Revelation 17 is Babylon. And the Leopard-Like beast is Assyria, anti-typical Assyria. 1 SR, page 20, Brother Haddon says,
Note the verbs was and healed are both in past tense. This being so, it is evident that this particular prophecy is to be fully understood after its fulfillment, as to when and how accomplished. We repeat the definition of the verbs being in the past tense. As it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. It is evident that inspiration foresaw that it would not be clearly understood until the divine prediction is fulfilled.
So this is what I was going over, the 3 wounds that were inflicted that basically gave rise to the leopard-like beast in 1500 AD. Martin Luther started the Protestant Reformation. In doing this, he wounded the religious part of the beast, the head. This was a precursor to the wounding of the horn, the civil powers. So that Protestant Reformation attacked the head and then the horn, right? Number 2, in 1798, the wounding of the horn civil power was a separate event and occurred in 1798 when Berthier took the Pope captive and exiled him. And then number 3, in 1870, the papacy then lost its civil power. And that's when church and state were separated, causing the horn to separate from the head. Now, what's going on in the background, right? What nation is born in 1776? The United States. Now, the United States is a Protestant nation, and the impetus for it, gaining steam and people coming over here is the Protestant Reformation. They're seeking religious freedom, and they build a nation where they can have that religious freedom, that they're not going to be bothered with the old world wars, church against state. Okay, many of them gave their lives. So they come over here to build a free society. So as the affliction came by an extended series of events and 3 stages, so the wound is healed in 3 stages. Let's clear a point. As long as the Protestant churches are dispensing truth, protesting, the wound will still be inflicted. But the leopard-like beast shows that all 7 heads of Christendom are under the title blasphemy. 7 denotes completeness, so it goes to show that the Adventist church is included in this. She has stopped protesting by failing to dispense present truth. Why? The rejection of the 1888 message that came to Jones and Wagner caused the presence of God to leave the leadership of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But let's not take this to mean that the Adventist Church is Babylon or part of the fallen churches. It is not. It is simply part of the present world. And yes, the beast will eventually do evil in the last days, but the part of the church who partakes in the spirit of this leopard-like beast, who wonders after it, are the tares. Remember the parable of the wheat and the tares? Remember Revelation 12, where the dragon spews out a flood of converts, tares, to swallow the church? God has to intervene, and the earth swallows the flood of tears and the symbolism. That's yet future. Sister White said of the tears that neither God nor his angels ever sowed a tear. They are always sown by the enemy. So we need to understand that everyone who is coming to God's church is not necessarily his. So let's look at the healings. Track 12 says that the beast receiving the deadly wounds pictures Christianized Rome, humiliated unto death, deprived of her civil power in 1870. Its recovering of the wound pictures her exalted unto life again, having regained her civil power. Yes, the papacy received their civil power back in 1929. And 1929 is a significant year because Brother Hadab talks about three things that happened. He got the message in 1929. Okay. He finishes his manuscript, The Shepherd's Rod, Volume 1, in 1930 and goes to the church. Okay. Another thing that happened is the rise of the horns on the next beast, not the leopard-like beast. And then Seventh-day Adventist Church in 1888, they began healing the head, right? Because if the Seventh-day Adventist Church was still protesting by dispensing present truth, then we would have never seen the civil power restored to the Pope. You get what I'm saying? But the last thing to happen, and this is the final stage of healing, and we're going to read that, is that it leads to a union of church and state. And remember, this healing happens on the leopard-like beast. It does not happen with the scarlet-colored beast. The scarlet-colored beast makes an image of the leopard-like beast before its deadly wound was inflicted. So we're talking specifically about the leopard-like beast in Revelation 13, why the world wonders after it, and what happens by its wound being healed. What happens on one beast cannot, as far as the horns and the heads, cannot depict what's happening on a future beast or past beast, okay? It's talking, those horns and heads belong to that beast. Brother Hadab says that in 2SR, page 88. He says horns and heads on a beast cannot depict something before or after that beast, as horns and heads naturally belong to the beast that they belong on, and heads do too. So this healing is talking specifically to the time of the Protestant nations, okay? While the Protestant nations are ruling and are dominant. And so that's the time period that we're living in now, because when this beast comes up, remember, it comes up because the Protestant Reformation. And that's why the horn and heads are separate, right? So it's the Protestant nations rising, okay, out of that papal power. And now they are the dominant force. Now, I don't have all the notes here, but you know, there's, Brother Hadab says it's the English speaking people, Protestant nations. Brother Don actually went through all the countries that it includes, which I am going to get that to you when I release the small code report, which we are going over a comprehensive look at this beast of contention, the leopard-like. We're going through the Adventist thought on it, and then we're going through our beliefs as the Salem Association, the people who believe in those small codes that were published after Brother Hadab's death. We're going through that. And then we're going through some Davidians who think that there's only one time of trouble. And they believe it all happens with the scarlet-colored beast, which is the next beast on the lineup, which is pretty much impossible if you really read and study carefully. So again, to review, Martin Luther overthrew popery in 1500 AD, inflicting the deadly wound. Because of that, there's the Pope going into captivity in 1798 by the French general Berthier. And then in 1870, what happens? The papacy loses its civil power, okay? And then also what happens in 1776, we have the rise of the Protestant nations with the U.S. being born, okay? And that's where we start to see the crown horns on this leopard-like beast. They represent kings who came into their kingdoms after the popes or the papacy's power was limited. Okay, they received their kingdoms back. Now, the healing of the wound on the other side only starts when the Protestants stop protesting. And Brother Hadif says it would have stopped in 1844 when the Protestant churches rejected the Sabbath truth and the sanctuary truth, the judgment of the dead, and they spiritually fell as a collective. It would have stopped there, but Adventists came on the scene and they kept on preaching the judgment of the dead, the sanctuary truth, the restoration of the Sabbath, okay? But not too long down the road, in 1888, they begin to scoff and they reject the message that is meant to take them into the kingdom, given to Jones and Wagner. And this sends them into a period of wilderness wandering. So by 1930, the message circles back and it comes back to the church and it's rejected again. It's rejected through Victor Hadif. And that basically heals the wound as the Seventh-day Adventist Church's leadership is no longer protesting. In fact, they're going after worldliness. That's why it says, and all the world wondered after the beast. The world never wondered after the beast if there was a true church that was still protesting. But because the Seventh-day Adventist Church stopped believing in the testimony of Jesus, in the spirit of prophecy, and the testimony of Jesus through his prophets, that's when the world started to wonder. And so that led to the civil power of the papacy being restored. And then the last thing that we're looking for is the union of church and state under the leopard-like beast. This last event constitutes the full healing of the wound. Okay, so let's continue with and look at Revelation 13:12 a little bit more closely. And it says that particular verse, Revelation 13:12 says, and he, the two-horned beast we're talking about, exercises all the power of the first beast. Now remember, Revelation 1-10 describes the leopard-like beast. So the leopard-like beast is the first beast to appear in Revelation 13. Let me read that again. And he, the two-horned beast, exercises all the power of the first beast, which is the leopard-like, before him, and causes the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. It says the two-horned beast will exercise all the power of the leopard-like beast when his deadly wound is healed. That is, sometime after the Protestant Reformation fails totally, depicted as the phase after the deadly wound heals, then the United States will cause them that dwell therein on the earth to worship the leopard-like beast. This compelling is the rise of despotism. This happens in the Assyrian time period, not on the Scarlet-Colored beast and not in the time of Babylon. This is the Assyrian Confederacy, also known as the time of Isaiah 8. Speaking on who the first beast is, Brother Hadif writes,
The two-horned beast exercises all the power which the first beast, the leopard-like, exercised, again showing it to be a world power. Indeed, it requires just such a power to compel all the inhabitants of the earth to worship as he commands, and to implement a likeness of a church and state government that is as outdated as are the Middle Ages themselves. Yes, it takes such a power to influence the world, save those whose names are written in the Lamb's Book of Life, to bow down to it.
So if the healing of the wound on one of the heads of the leopard-like beast represents the rising of the scarlet-colored beast, that rule would be contradicted. The rule that he outlined in Shepherd's Rod Volume 2. To put it simply, that wound healing can only happen during the time period represented by the beast it belongs to, the leopard-like beast. So it's clear, look at where the two-horned beast is. The two-horned beast has interactions with both the leopard-like and the scarlet-colored beast. You can see that this represents a 6th period of time, and the scarlet-colored beast is the last beast before the millennium, and that's the 7th period of the time. The Bible says of that beast in Revelation 17, 8 through 11, he is the 8th and is of the 7. Okay, and he says he's the 8th because this beast also comes up after the millennium. That's when all the wicked are risen up, but he is of the 7. And so he's actually the 7th period of time. You can see that with the leopard-like beast, his pathway ends when his deadly wound is healed, right? It's going downward. You see that trajectory? So that's the pathway of the leopard-like beast. And it says hereafter his deadly wound is healed, Revelation 13:3. When that wound reaches its final stage of healing, which we know is the church-state confederacy of Isaiah 8, and it's also pictured in Revelation 13, that's when his career is over. And the things that we're going to see out of this leopard-like beast is the gigantic war. And Ezekiel 9 also happens under this time period. Now you can also see that the nondescript beast right here, the hornhead nondescript beast, and the leopard-like beast paths, they overlap. But the scarlet-colored beast pathway doesn't seem to do that, right? He's kind of like over here by himself. In fact, the only one that is like on this pathway to the scarlet-colored beast is actually the two-horned beast. So in 2SR, Brother Hodge said the deadly wound is healed by the Catholic Church regaining, but in other places he describes additional signs, and we're going to read those comments that he says. And that's found in track 12 on pages 23 through 26. Brother Hodge writes,
Furthermore, whereas the beasts receiving the deadly wound pictures Christianized Rome humiliated unto death, deprived of her civil power, its recovering from the wound pictures her exalted unto life, again having regained her civil power. And as the wound was inflicted by the hand of the Reformation, it could never have healed had the hand continued wielding at it the sharp, two-edged sword. The healing, therefore, vividly depicts the fall of Protestantism and the rise of despotism.
Then he says on page 25,
detail by detail, we are thus far enabled to see that the healing of the wound is indicative not only of the Church's failing to carry the Protestant Reformation to completion, but also of the world's governments soon reverting to the despotic principles of the Dark Ages, to the rule of action before the wound was inflicted. This repetition of the past is to be brought about by the two-horned beast.
And the third statement that Brother Hodge writes is in Timely Greetings, Volume 2, number 17, page 8, paragraph 4.
If Protestantism wounded the beast by the Reformation, then the healing of the wound shows nothing less that the Reformation has failed to keep the wound open, that the goal of the Reformers has died, and despotism has been revived.
Despotism is the last thing to happen under the leopard-like beast. It is its final stage, its wound being healed. Despotism is defined as a country or political system where the ruler holds absolute power. Normally, that entity is an individual, the despot, as in autocracies, but societies which limit respect and power to specific groups, like one party, have also been called despotic. So this is the last state of the world under the leopard-like beast. It's a precursor to the rise of the Scarlet-Colored beast. The United States, although a world power under the leopard-like beast, may not accomplish the entire subjugation of the world as we view it when it becomes despotic. The language of the biblical text, "and causes the earth and them that dwell therein to worship the first beast," may simply show how despotism spreads through the Protestant nations, the United States and their allies, minus their communistic totalitarian counterparts. Honestly, despotism already exists in these totalitarian societies, but the despotism that we're looking for is part of a religious system, right? A system of false religion. And that's the church-state confederacy under the leopard-like beast. The fact that the seventh period of time, represented by the Scarlet-Colored beast, shows the horns, communism, have become the dominant civil power in the world, testify to the following events. Despotism will arise in America and spread quickly throughout the Protestant nations. And we can actually already see that happening now. Some countries, in their pandering to, our executive branch, are starting to mimic what's happening today in America. The conservative far-right party, the Republican Party, currently controls all three branches of government and is wielding a gargantuan effort to maintain control indefinitely. Republicans hold a majority on the Supreme Court, a majority in both houses of Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate, and we have a Republican president, President Donald J. Trump. Presidency and conservative actors in each branch have instituted an aggressive plan called Project 2025, which details the dissolving and restructuring of the federal government in favor of a more religious state. So as an American living in America, I can tell you that we are seeing rapid changes to our government at levels never seen before in American history. So I've talked about this in one of my other videos, is that each federal officer, employee, military service member, politician, and president all swear the following oath before they are able to take office. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I will take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office I am about to enter, so help me God. So everyone swore to this, right? The problem is no one in the current administration actually meant it when they swore this oath. President Trump just recently gave an interview where he told the interviewer he doesn't know if it's really his job to uphold the Constitution. Now, Brother Hadif said that the Constitution is divinely inspired, that its author is actually Jesus. He says this in the Quran. He said he's the one that inspired that document because what was his purpose? His purpose was to birth the Church of God, the truth. So God had to create an environment where that could happen. So he takes his believers, the reformers, away from the old world where persecution, martyrdom is carried, into a new world, and basically allows this country to grow up and prosper. And it becomes the number one Protestant nation in the world. It surpasses England after World War II. So now what we have is Ellen White says that the Protestants will start to use the state to enforce their dogmas. That is your religious beliefs. When they start to use the state to enforce their dogmas and start doing their decrees, then she says the marvelous working of Satan is near and the repudiation of the Constitution is going to happen. Now, Brother Haddad says that we are to be loyal to this country as long as they do not violate the principles of the Constitution. And we're not talking about an insurrection or anything, a violent insurrection, but we have to look forward to the time that we will actually be called to be religious dissenters. Isaiah 8 says, "Say ye not a confederacy to all them who say a confederacy." We're entering into the time of Jonah. Jonah was a type. Jonah being swallowed by a fish, spewed out on the land when he tried to leave, represents the Protestants coming over from the old world. They come to the new world, right? The Church of God is birthed. And then the whole reason that we've been given this message of present truth is so we can go to Nineveh and tell them, hey, don't form church with state. Do not do this. Say ye not a confederacy. And the culmination of this conflict is that they will ask the Adventist church to join. That's the culmination of the conflict. And the whole reason why Satan is working so hard to destroy liberties of people, and it's starting with the outliers, right? The outliers are of society, you know, with trans or people who are criminals, you know, they're getting deported. Those rights are being infringed now. And who can really disagree and say, hey, you know, well, you really shouldn't be doing that. I mean, there are people that are disagreeing, but most people are like, yeah, you know, we need to get these people out of the country. Right now, in the United States, all these things are happening, all these conflicts are happening, and it's only for one purpose. Because at the exact moment that God's people are disclosed to view, Satan will try to destroy them. He will turn all these laws and stuff that he's manipulating and trying to turn into, you know, America into oppressive regime. He's waiting for the moment that he can turn it on the people of God. And he wants to destroy the truth, people of God. He wants to destroy that. He does not want to see the 144,000 on Mount Zion. He does not want to see the kingdom established. And it's for this reason that he is attacking, you know, the church with so much worldliness, so they can't discern. They don't even know the spirit of prophecy. But he's also attacking Davidians too. Because now we have Davidians who are saying, oh, we don't have a trouble under the leopard-like beast. We don't have to go and protest this confederacy. That's what they're saying. These anti-small code people that don't believe in Brother Haddad's sermons on the Assyrian Confederacy, they're saying that now. Well, I'm here to tell you, if you think that you're going to stay neutral and not say anything during the time of Jonah, the antitypical time of Jonah, where we're supposed to go to Nineveh and Assyria and say, look, you're not supposed to do this. God is not with you. You join church and state, it's going to lead to the Sunday law. It's going to lead to the oppression of the people of God. You know, what about the Sabbath, the restoration of the Sabbath? Why give people a Sunday law in the direct opposition to God? We got to tell them all these things. And we got to tell our brethren in the church, do not join. The very last test for the Adventist church is the test under this confederacy. If you join it, you will be snared, taken in Ezekiel 9. That is the very last test. And it has to happen. People think God's judgments are cruel, but it has to happen because the brethren in the church Great Controversy 675, page 675. They turn against us. They turn us into authorities. The Ellen White says they are the most effective agents for Satan to stir up the rulers against us. And if you think that for one moment that it's going to be well with you all the way to the kingdom, we are in for a trouble. So just prepare yourself, embrace yourselves, get your family ready, get yourself ready. Our only hope is in Jesus Christ the Lord, and knowing the scriptures so well that we cannot be moved out of our position, because all of hell's fury will be unleashed on us at this time. This is Jacob's time of trouble. He goes through the trouble as he's going home. He has Esau after him. He has Laban after him. The Esauites in the church are the ones that are profane people. They despise their birthright for temporal gain, for worldly gain. And that's who we are going to come against when we come to the time of Isaiah 8. So some of the things that are happening in the U.S., every single autonomous federal organization or entity is being dismantled, okay? All federal departments, all federal regulatory and law enforcement agencies, all federal appointees and military leaders are being replaced with grossly unqualified loyalists. This is very strategic, and this is all outlined in Project 2025. That plan was written by about 80 religious organizations. And one of the main ones behind it is the Jesuits. And they have said they're behind this Project 2025 because they said the church doesn't think in terms of decades or even centuries. That's what the main author, the guy that's behind it, I forgot his name. He said, we think in terms of millennia. That's what he said. So they're playing the long game. And the left kind of, contributed to this because they kind of pushed away the moderates. So Satan's working on both sides. The left went really high and the pendulum swung to the left. And now you see it's crashing back down. It swung all the way to the right, and it's going to the other extreme. And so, like I said, all this is happening because it's here for the people of God. It's the devil setting the trap for the people of God, for the church. So as we can see, Brother Hatter's prediction of despotism rising on the leopard-like beast, and that phase is right on target. We can see that happening now. America is predicted to first be a non-dictatorial government that is despotic. That's what we're seeing now. But will eventually change to become a dictatorship under the Scarlet-Colored beast phase. Once the judicial branch is destroyed and the armed forces plus the city, state, and federal police fall in line with the orders of the executive branch or the Republican Party, Conservative Party, however you want to call it, and they ignore and effectively dissolve the Constitution, the freedoms that Americans have enjoyed so freely and easily will evaporate right before their eyes. Now, Johnson, the House Majority Leader, he said that they have a plan to dissolve the judicial branch. He said they're going to either dissolve it or greatly limit their power. And so right now, the judicial branch is the only one that is basically putting in check, what the executive branch is doing. But the judicial branch does not have an army of its own. It doesn't have a police force of its own. The whole system is dependent on whether or not the Army, the National Guard, the local, state police force, national police force, they obey the Constitution. And so now we see why the prophet talks so much about the Constitution and why we are to be loyal to the Constitution. He's preparing us for this fight under the time of Isaiah 8. America will be defeated in the gigantic war of Zechariah 14. That's another study. That's during the Leopard-Like period. Okay. It suffers a blow that fuels its desperation. It's going to try to recoup. Okay, that's the closing act of the Leopard-Like beast. The prophet says when Assyria is being crushed, that's when the Lord is going to purify the church. That's a sign. But the federation of church and state actually happens while the nations are girding themselves for war. Therefore, the sealing must be over by the time that church-state confederacy is actually formed. Because remember, that's when the devil's fury is going to be pointed to who? The people of God. So we must be sealed to be protected from everything and everybody. It has to be sealed before the war because the confederacy happens while the nations are girding themselves for war. So we can see in the timeline of things, in the scheme of things, how close we are to that sealing being finished. That's how we know it's time for us to make our calling and election sure as present truth believers. And we know this because of the sermons preached in the small codes. So the scarlet-colored beast will create an image of the leopard-like, okay? But Brother Hadam says, yes, let it be remembered that the sealing is in two sections, that the 144,000, the first fruits, and that of the great multitude, the second fruits. The 144,000 being sealed before the worship of the image of the beast is urged upon us, it follows that the seal of God is placed on the second fruits while Sunday observance and the worship of the image of the beast is being enforced. Do you see what Brother Hod is saying here? He's saying that we're already sealed before the worship of the image of the beast happens. Before this time in the Scarlet-Colored beast, when the worldwide confederacy happens, that is the image of this beast with the deadly wound healed. So it's already over for us. Adventists will never even see this time period unless they're sealed and they come into the kingdom. They won't see it because Ezekiel 9 happens here. So the summary of it is this: the correct understanding of the leopard-like beast is the entire premise of the shepherd's rod message. And that is where we differ from traditional Adventist thought. They don't see it. They don't know it. They don't expect the trouble. And that's why they get snared in the trap of the Confederacy. And now, unfortunately, we have Davidians too, who think there's no Confederacy and may be snared in it as well. So it's our duty to understand the leopard-like beast correctly. We have to understand our duty during the Assyrian Confederacy of Isaiah 8 and faithfully discharge it. If we do not protest this Confederacy as the scripture commands, and as the sign of Jonah and the small codes affirm, we will be lost, taken in Ezekiel 9. This is Seventh-day Adventist Church and the 144,000. It is Jacob's time of trouble.
Okay.
So Brother Hodder makes comparisons between the leopard-like beast and the scarlet-colored beast that people get confused about. He talks about that, but he does it to show that they are in a sequence. just like the beasts are in Daniel 7. And he did that because the Adventist Church teaches that the nondescript beast, the leopard-like beast, the scarlet-colored beast, and the dragon in Revelation 12 are all the papacy or Rome. So he was trying to show the church that the beast in Daniel 7, Revelation 13, and Revelation 17 are a sequential timeline. And another reason he also makes the comparisons between the scarlet-colored beast and the leopard-like is because one is an image of the other. But they're not the same. They're different periods of time. And this leopard-like beast is the one that we have to be worried about as Adventists, because we will be in the kingdom and receiving the forces of the Gentiles during the time of the mark of the beast and the image of the beast. Let me just read one more statement from 12 Symbolic Code number 1, page 7. The period we are now in is antitypical Assyria. The Assyrian period is about to pass away and the period of Babylon to be ushered in. But there is another thing that is to happen between the setting up of the Confederacy of Isaiah 8:9 and the rise of Babylon. It is the setting up of God's kingdom. God's people are to be taken to their own land and made free. See, we're already in the kingdom by the time Babylon comes. In the outlining of the chapters, we find this order. He's talking about the book of Isaiah. The 7th chapter brings the birth of the Christians and the federation against them. The 8th chapter brings in the latter-day confederacy of peoples and nations and the outcome of it. The 9th and 10th chapters again contain a continuation of the antitypical period of Assyria and her fall. The 11th chapter brings the setting up of the kingdom of God. The 12th chapter expresses the praise of those in Zion in the kingdom. The 13th chapter brings the burden of Babylon. Recently, you recall, we studied the 10th chapter of Isaiah and found that this chapter brings us to the time when the period of antitypical Assyria is to come to its end. We might naturally expect Babylon to follow next, because that's the period that comes after the fall of Assyria. But that is not correct. For Christ's kingdom must also come in its proper time. That is the child, his people, when they have become mature, born-again Christians. The burden of Babylon, therefore, is not mentioned until the 13th chapter of Isaiah.